Okay,
Okay, we should be good to go.
okay, great. So for anyone watching this recording later, we have a quick little bio that I'll just read through before we get into some of these questions. Sky Cubacub is a non-binary, xenogender, and disabled Filipinx queer from Chicago. Sky uses they, them, and z/them pronouns. In 2014, they created Rebirth Garments, a line of custom-designed clothes for trans, queer, and disabled people of all ages and sizes. Sky is also the editor of Radical Visibility Zine, which celebrates disabled queer joy and edits a section on ethics and inclusion of the literary fashion magazine Just Femme and Dandy. Sky has lectured at several universities, including Northwestern, and Rebirth Garments has been featured in Teen Vogue, Nylon, Playboy, Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Vice, Wussy Mag, and the New York Times. In 2018, the Chicago Tribune named Sky Chicagoan of the Year. Okay, so to jump into some of our questions, first off, we were reading through your manifesto and we saw that it starts with a quote from Audre Lorde. Quote, the visibility which makes us most vulnerable is that which also is the source of our greatest strength. So what does that line mean to you and how has it influenced your work?
Yeah, I mean, I love all of Audre Lorde's writings. It's like so amazing to read from another, like queer disabled person, person of color. So I, got very into reading her work. I think that a lot of times visibility can be so scary because it can be used also to like weaponize things against us, and like when you are more visible, then you can be more prone to more like violent acts. But I am into taking that visibility and subverting it and reclaiming it, and like having our own autonomy in like being radically visible and deciding how we want to be seen to the world, like just all on our own terms. So that's kind of how I am really interested in radical visibility of all folks with different kind of marginalized identities, and especially people with multiple marginalized identities. I I've always been a pretty like visible person since I was a young person, and I noticed that when I was an early teenager, I used to like get grabbed on the street or on the train, like on the CTA a lot, by like creepy men. And I noticed that when I started wearing really loud, bright colors and like my like chainmail that is literal armor, as well as my makeup that looks like tattoos, I would still get a lot of people like talking to me and like interacting with me, but I had a huge decrease in like the amount of more like violent or like scary acts. So like making myself have this like literal armor, and then also like things that are just like not literal armor, but makeup that looks like a tattoo, is a way to like be sort of like a poisonous frog, where it's like, ooh, so pretty, but like I'm not going to touch because that person's looks a little wild. So like that's kind of what I saw, like the difference between how people were interacting with me, and I much preferred that. And also I liked it because it's like more of how I always wanted to dress, but didn't necessarily have access to dressing like this when I was younger.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think you were kind of touching a little bit on the idea of radical visibility, which we saw from your website is a concept that Rebirth Garments really centers. Can you talk more about what that is and what it means to you?
Yeah, radical visibility, it's not just about like sighted visibility, it's also about like it's just all about taking up space as a marginalized person, as a person of color, as a disabled person, as a mad neurodivergent person, as a queer non-binary person, and then like, yeah, other folks of marginalized identities, taking up both physical space, visual space, auditory space, textural space, just like every kind of space there is. and making sure that we are not ignored, as well as we are not like assimilated into the cis hetero patriarchal culture. Like we are showing what is important to us and what we are to the world.
Yeah. And how has that influenced your design process work? And how do you work with individuals to create their dream garments?
So I have a video that I could send y'all if you want to edit it into the interview or something. And that shows my design process with each of my models and any clients who like want to go through it. Not all clients want to do like a full interview, because some people like to just like put in their measurements and color preferences and run away. But I always ask people what would make clothing more accessible to your body, what would show off your gender expression best, what parts of your body you want to highlight, what parts you feel vulnerable about, and what parts you feel vulnerable about but want to highlight in this context, as well as like favorite colors and patterns. And I take all of that and I try to make a dream garment for anybody who wants to go through that more detailed process. And like, yeah, it started out just a lot of designers start out by like making clothing for their own self or like their family members or friends. And so that definitely influenced the like just this personal style that I had cultivated since I was a young person, and especially as a teen, really is what is the basis of like how radical visibility came to be. Like when I was writing my manifesto, it was for a school project actually. And I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which I didn't really like, but I did really love the teacher that I wrote this manifesto for, Romy Crawford. And I didn't have a title for it at first. I just was like, I don't know, this is like all the things that I've been feeling for so long. And I had her as a teacher previously, and she really saw this like connected line of like literally everything that I had been talking about in all of my projects always. And she took me out to the hallway. I was wearing head to toe hot pink. And she was like, you're just always so radically visible. And I just like knew that that was going to be the name of the manifesto. So yeah, partially it's like a style that I was drawn to always. But then I also saw like the results of the style and how people treated me when I wore it. But then like taking that and applying it to the clothing line. I think I was also very influenced by my late father's paintings, which are behind me. And I have some of the prints on my clothing right now. So I grew up with all of these like super geometric, super saturated jewel tones, neon colors, paintings with a lot of these spirals in it. And I think, and like other kinds of geometry. So that is like the aesthetic style that I was always really drawn to, even though I didn't fully draw the connection line between it being from my father's paintings. But yeah, so I take that and I was like making clothing, like just what I wanted to wear. Because when I started out in fashion, I was making more like sculptural garments out of chainmail and like found objects like washers I found under the L tracks, or like scissors that were confiscated from the airport, and like all these other more like I guess less wearable but more sculptural garments. And I just really wanted to, when I was thinking about what I would want to make for people and for the world and contribute to the world, I wanted to make something that was as wearable as possible, like that you could do anything in. So everything you can dance and swim in and do any sort of like physical activities in, but you can also just like be comfy and lounge around. So like that's kind of how I started making the stuff was just like things that I really wanted that I couldn't find. And then just like people were interested in it, and I got to start making it for other people.
And how did disability justice and queer activism lead you to working in the fashion world?
So I would say that I was interested in like bodily adornment since I was a very young child. I got really into like beading and then into chainmailing when I was 13. I think a lot of that has to do with like being neurodivergent and mad. So for me, it was very much a stim. So like both the act of making these repetitive processes as well as the act of wearing them and feeling them, what was such a stim, even though I didn't have the language for that at the time. And it helped me really like cope and calm my brain down when I was super anxious or like having panic attacks, because I've always had panic disorder and anxieties since I can remember. So it wasn't like uh, rooted in like a academic thing at first. It was just like what I was drawn to. Um, but then, yeah, when I was in college and I gained a new disability where my stomach kind of stopped working properly, which now I think might have been connected to my polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I literally just had surgery like almost exactly a month ago to get my right ovary taken out and cyst. So I'm like, maybe stomach things will be chilled out a little bit. So that's kind of exciting. But yeah, my stomach stopped working properly, so I couldn't really eat very much for a very long time. I like survived on mango kefir for months, and also like things on my stomach hurt very bad. So I could no longer wear most of the clothing that I had previously worn. In high school, I wore like pretty much only like super tight skinny jeans, like trip jeans that were patterned. Um, and yeah, I still really like that style, but it was no longer good or accessible or comfortable for my body. So I wanted to make really comfy spandex clothing. And like, yeah, the first thing I did was like make things with really soft waistbands that didn't even have like elastic in them. That it's just a folded over piece of spandex. Because a lot of times you don't actually need things to be that tight to stay up on you. Unless it's like something that's really heavy, but I didn't want to make very heavy clothing anymore. So yeah, I was just making very comfy things. And then I've also always had sensory problems with seams ever since I was a very young child. So I would wear my socks inside out for most of my life, as well as a good amount of times my underwear inside out, just because the seams really hurt me. Although technology has gotten better, so the seams are not as rough as they were in the 90s, I feel like. But so, yeah, I make everything so that people can request that all of the seams be sewn on the outside. And then when I was 16, I was one of the co-presidents of the Gay Straight Alliance at my high school, which is now called Queers and Allies. And I went to like a conference for all of the Chicago Gay Straight Alliance presidents. And we got to see some drag kings like show us how they did their like getting ready routine. So they were showing us how they like bound their chests and wore packers and like made packers and did their facial hair. And I was just like completely obsessed. And I like was just always wanting to have these types of gender affirming garments, but I didn't have access to them as a person who was under 18, and especially as a person who looks a lot younger than I am. So even as a 30-year-old, most people read me as 16. So I had no hope of going to the shops that actually sold these types of gender affirming garments at the time, which are primarily and still are primarily sex toy shops. So I wanted to make something where people could order it online, but also people could message me and I could just send free or sliding scale garments if that wasn't possible for them to like have access to digital money, because that wasn't something that I had access to as a young person. And when I started it, I really I'm really into people having autonomy and choice. So I wanted to have all of the colors available for everything and not make any sort of judgments on what colors were for what types of garments or like gendering them at all. So because like, yeah, I've always liked neons. And I mean, at the time, I didn't have the language about like non-binary identities when I was a high schooler. But when I met my first like non-binary person when I was 18, I was like, oh, that's how I feel. And then now, just in the past year, I found out about xenogender identities, which a lot of like mad and neurodivergent folks like also feel like very much xenogender. So like thinking of gender not in terms of like human genders or like binary genders at all, and thinking of it more as like a more expansive thing. And yeah, so I think that all kind of led me to start the clothing line the way that I did. And then when I wrote my manifesto, I did like a lot of research into queer theory and disability and crip theory, and reference it a lot in my manifesto. Like I think the full manifesto has like a bibliography that's like 6 pages long. Let me plug in my computer really quick. Ready.
Great. So going off of that last point, what does just disability justice mean to you, and how does it connect to radical visibility?
So yeah, I'm really into like sins and valids definitions and principles of disability justice. Like, yeah, definitely the main thing being like it is intersectional and talking about how all of these identities are connected, and not just focusing on it as like a single identity issues politic, like because a lot of the disability rights movement is very very white and very much like older white men. So yeah, thinking of it in a much more expansive and intersectional way, as well as being very connected to abolition and yeah, just like liberation in general. And yeah, I see radical visibility as a part of that. Like my clothing line, from what I know and from what people have told me, it's like the first one to talk about intersectional identities. Like I mean, just talking about queerness or transness and disability in general, but then I also talk about being POC, and then also making clothing for people of all sizes and ages. So thinking about all of those, and then even also having options to make like modest wear for folks who may be religious of different religions. So yeah, I see radical visibility as like very tied into disability justice, and that's what like I gravitated towards when I was doing the research for my manifesto, which I wrote because when I was telling people my idea for my clothing line, and I was like, I want to make clothing for queer and trans folks with disabilities, and like the people I was talking to like couldn't imagine that disabled folks could have sex and or a sexuality or even a gender. So they were very confused and thought that I was saying that queerness was a disability, which I absolutely never was saying. And they'd be like, why would you do this to us? You're setting us back, all this stuff, which I'm also like, that's problematic to like say that disability is so bad that like, you know, that you don't like, you need to push down disabled folks in order to elevate queer and trans folks. Cause like, that's not what I'm about either. But I was also like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying queers who are disabled. But most of the people just like couldn't even imagine that. So that's why I wrote the manifesto, because I was like, this is what I'm about. And I also had noticed that it was really interesting because in high school, I was like known as like the flaming queer, like always. Whereas when I was in college, all of these, like, even though literally all my projects were about queerness or like transness or like non-binariness, even if I didn't have that exact language, but like that was definitely the theme. Like all these white queers would always be like, why is a straight cis person talking about this? And I'm like, I literally have never said that I was straight. I am not. And I like, why are you just reading me like this? And I realized that they just had not heard of Asian queer people before or trans people. So I was like, ooh, y'all have a lot of work to do. And yeah, so that was like a weird culture shock going to SAC, also because disability was so like, it's such like an exclusionary school to begin with, just pricing wise, but also just like they're obsessed with this culture of like burnout and overwork, in like not a healthy way, and not like, I mean, yeah, that's always not a healthy way, but like that's like what they would brag about, like the fashion students never being able to go home and just sleeping in the hallways because like they didn't give them a proper amount of time in class, or like didn't teach them to like cope with doing like managing time at all. So yeah, it just was like a school that had no nothing really good to teach to anybody, I would say. Sorry, I went off topic.
No worries. So thinking towards the future, where do you want to go from here? And I guess what are your next steps?
Ooh, this is always like a very difficult question now. I feel like I used to dream a lot about the future, and I think it's important to dream about the future, but also it's so hard to in with current events. Like, yeah, I gained another disability just not too long ago. In December 2019, I got mono, which turned into chronic fatigue syndrome. So that's like extremely impacted my ability to work. Even though like I've come up with a lot of ways to adapt my work, it's still pretty hard if I'm just never awake. Which sometimes I'll be sleeping like 20 hours a day. So then it just leaves you 4 hours to eat and use the bathroom. But yeah, I think I've been focusing a lot more on education. I have been working with the Chicago Public Library on a queer fashion curriculum that also like talks about disability, because that's what I'm about. It's called Radical Fit, and we have right now, I think like 85 videos on YouTube available to anybody. It's targeted towards teens, but since it's on YouTube, anybody can watch it. And we will have some in-person classes at some point. And then we have 2 in-person events, but they're outdoors this summer, June 18th and August 28th. They're both called Queer Radical Fair. And we're also working with Queering the Parks, which is connected to Chicago Park District and Chicago Freedom School, as well as a bunch of other amazing organizations, but it's all like under the like celebration of Radical Fit. We did one last year and it was very successful. So that's what I'm working on mostly. And then this other big project that I've been trying to do since like right before the pandemic was, but yeah, has been continually delayed, but at some point I'll do it, is a kids TV show that I really want to start. So I'd be the host and then have a bunch of fun guests and like animation and puppetry, and it'd be kind of like a queer Mr. Rogers slash out of the box slash Zoom, like the kids TV show Zoom, not this Zoom. um, so yeah, it'd have lots of crafting, and we talk about queerness and transness and disability, and focus on a different like disability justice thing every episode. So yeah, definitely one of the episodes will be about like fragrance free cuteness, and like also an episode definitely about audio description and image description, and yeah, just like different focuses each episode, but it'll all be very cute and colorful when it happens.
Oh, that's a lot coming up. We are starting to come up on time, so I wanted to open up for anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess people can find me at rebirthgarments.com or on Instagram at rebirthgarments. I also have a TikTok and Twitter, but I mostly avoid those because they give me anxiety. But my Instagram has all my links, which has all of the links to all of the things that I do. And yeah, so people can check out all of my work there. Oh, and I have a new web shop. I've been trying to transition or like kind of divest from just being on Etsy. So it's still in like beta testing mode, but I have like my 3 most popular items on my Rebirth Garments website. So at some point I'd love to just escape from Etsy, but it seems very difficult. So we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. Talia and Lauren, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I don't think I have anything. Thank you so much for talking to us, though. I really appreciate it. It's super insightful.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. Nothing else here to add, but thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Yeah, thank you for asking me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We've really appreciated it, and I've really enjoyed getting to hear what you've had to say.
Cool. Oh yeah, and here I'll put a link in the chat for the custom fitting video if you want to add that into. So yeah, this is the process for me working with models. And then you can also see on my Vimeo the trailer for my kids show.
Cool. We will be sure to check those out. That will be very helpful.